Hi everyone, my name is Brandy Carey. I'm an instructor here at MPC. In fact, I have the great honor of teaching English 53, which happens to be a poetry class. So it's a special event for me and some of my students, as well as all of you, but especially for us, right? Before I get started introducing our wonderful poet, I'd like to thank a couple of entities and people for making tonight possible. First, I'd like to thank the Arts Council for Monterey County, as well as the Monterey County Weekly and the MPC Foundation, as well as Michelle Brock, Henry Marchand, and Diane Boyden from the Humanities Department for organizing the event. Perfect. That's my cue, that's it. Tonight's poet is Ada Limón, and she's a native Californian, but she's lived all over the United States, and I'm excited to have her here because I am a big fan of her work. She has four books of poetry out, and her newest book, titled Bright Dead Things, is just 16 days old, but has already been nominated for the National Book Award. Okay? She studied at NYU and earned her MFA there. She studied under some wonderful poets like Sharon Olds, Philip Levine, and also Mark Doty. So she comes from a wonderful background in that respect. She's also a teacher as well, and she writes in many capacities: essay writing, freelance writing, as well as I hear a young adult book is in the works for her as well. So she brings a tremendous range to her poetry. When I was reading about her and looking at reviews, which were all gleaming and wonderful, a couple of similarities in terms kept bubbling up to the surface. So a couple of words that have been used over and over again to describe her work are things like energetic, lyrical, attention-grabbing, smart, risky, unexpected, and that her work caters to both the mind and the heart. And I couldn't agree with those terms more. I had the wonderful privilege of having her in my class last night, my English 53 class, and she came and read and did a Q&A session with some of my students. And after she left, one of my students came up to me and said that I feel so inspired and filled up, I really needed that. And she really made an impression on my class. And it really is what we expect from a poet, isn't it? That they kind of make that impact, that stamp, that they lead us to connect to the world and to the human experience, that they inspire us and ground us. And that's exactly what she did. We could spend a long time dissecting her poems. My students and I could spend at least an hour of class just looking at one poem because they're so highly crafted. Right? She has everything in there that you would want. It's a feast for a poetry instructor. Sound devices, metaphor, subject, voice, persona, it's all in there. But aside from that craft, there is a tremendous emotional awareness. And that's really what you're going to take with you tonight when you hear her read. Is that although she's a craftsperson of poetry, she has this capacity to reach us all on a very deep and inspirational level. Okay? And when she left my class, one of the last things she said to us was, poetry teaches empathy. Okay? All right, so I'd like to welcome Ada Limón, please.
Thank you. Wow. It's funny when you sit in the front, you think no one showed up, and then you turn look at all your beautiful faces. Thank you so much for having me and for that beautiful introduction. I've enjoyed my 2 days on campus and meeting with the students and getting to do a little more intimate Q&A, etc. I'm going to primarily read today from the new book, Bright Dead Things. Like Brandy said, it was nominated for a National Book Award, and it seems so bizarre to me because it's just in my hands. And 2 days ago, I was just informed that it went into its second printing. And to have a book that just came out, that kind of news is never happened to me. In fact, after I arrived in Sonoma, and I said to my stepdad, nothing like this has ever happened to me. And he started laughing. He goes, well, yeah. It's not an everyday occurrence. So yeah, I don't know. I was laughing with some friends that I know how to handle failure. I'm very good at that. I'm a writer, so that's what we're steeped in. So that like when failure comes, I'm like, I know you, I got this. You get back up, you work harder. But this kind of wonderful news and the joyousness of this recognition is not something I know how to deal with, and I've been taking a lot of naps. That's how I've been dealing with it. I've just been napping a lot. So we'll start at the beginning. We'll start with the first poem in this book. This poem is about the day before the Kentucky Derby, which is the Oaks Day, which is the day when all the lady horses race. This is a poem for the ladies. How to triumph like a girl. I like the lady horses best, how they make it all look easy. Like running 40 miles per hour is as fun as taking a nap or grass. I like their lady horse swagger after winning. Ears up, girls, ears up. But mainly, let's be honest, I like that they're ladies. As if this big, dangerous animal is also a part of me. That somewhere inside the delicate skin of my body, there pumps an 8-pound female horse heart. Giant with power, heavy with blood. Don't you want to believe it? Don't you want to lift my shirt and see the huge, beating, genius machine that thinks, no, it knows it's going to come in first. I live across from a 40-acre tree farm, and this is a prose poem, and a poem that I didn't know Robert Frost had a mowing poem, but he does as well, but this is not his poem. Mowing. The man across the street is mowing 40 acres on a small lawnmower. It's so small, it must take him days. So I imagine that he likes it. He must. He goes around each tree carefully. He has 10,000 trees. It's a tree farm, so there are so many trees. One circle here, one circle there. My dog and I have been watching, the lights escaping the sky, and there's this place I like to stand. It's before the rise, so I'm invisible. I'm standing there, and I've got the dog, and the man is mowing his circles, so many circles. There are no birds or anything, or none that I can see. I imagine what it must be like to stay hidden, disappear in the dusky nothing, and stay still in the night. It's not sadness, though it may sound like it. I'm thinking about people and trees, and how I wish I could be silent more, be more tree than anything else, less clumsy and loud, less crow, more cool white pine. And how it's hard not to always want something else, not to just let the savage grass grow. In Kentucky, there's a phrase I'd never heard before. I hate it for you. And it's kind of can be used in different ways. So it can be used if your mother's sick. You could say, "Oh, I hate it for her." Or it can just be, a car broke down. Hate it for you. There's a poem about that. Down here. The dog does this beautiful thing. It waits. It stills itself and determines that the waiting is essential. I suppose this eternity is the one inside the drawer, inside the buttonhole. All the shouting before was done out loud on the streets, and now it's done so shushingly. There is a saying down here I'd never heard before. I hate it for you. It means if the dog pees on the carpet, I hate it for you. Too bad for you. It means if you're alone, when love is all around, we all tip our lonely hats in one unlonely sound. This is a poem where the title came from in this book. It's funny, I would say it's about carrots, but I always say it's about something, and then that's clearly not what the poem is about at all. I remember the carrots. I haven't given up on trying to live a good life, a really good one even. Sitting in the kitchen in Kentucky, imagining how agreeable I'll be, the advance of fulfillment and of desire, all these needs met, then unmet again. When I was a kid, I was excited about carrots, their spidery neon tops in the garden's plot, and so I ripped them all out. I broke the new roots and carried them like a prize to my father, who scolded me, rightly, for killing his whole crop. I loved them, my own right dead things. I'm 35 and remember all that I've done wrong. Yesterday, I was nice, but in truth, I resented the contentment of the field. Why must we practice the surrender? What I mean is, there are days I still want to kill the carrots because I can. This is a love poem. Every time I read this poem in Kentucky, I have to say, but I like it here now. You just have to realize that my goal was to move back home to Sonoma, and I ended up moving to Kentucky. But there's a reason. Love is the reason. So you'll see why they get a little antsy at the first line. State bird. Confession. I did not want to live here. Not among the goldenrod, wild onions, or the drop seed. Not waist high in the barrel-aged brown corn water. Not with the $1,000,000 racehorses, nor the tightly wound round hay bales. Not even in the old tobacco way station we live in, with its heavy metal safe doors that frame our bricked bedroom like the mouth of a strange beast yawning to suck us in each night like air. I denied it, this new land. But love, I'll concede this. Whatever state you are, I'll be that state's bird. The loud, obvious blur of song people point to when they wonder where it is you've gone. I'll read a short poem that's for the writers, all the writers that I met in the past 2 days of classes. I think if someone said what my advice would be, if I could just read them this poem, this would be my advice. Bellow. Tell the range and all that's howling, the flickers of life beyond the weeds, the vulture's furrowed brow of flight, the blasted sticky Canadian lawn thistle. Tell the clowned out clouds and the rain, and all that makes you go quiet again. Tell them that you didn't come here to make a fuss or break or growl or scream. Tell them crazy sky and stars between. Tell them you didn't come here to disturb the night air and throw a fit. Then get down in the dark and do it. It's true. It's a true story. In 2009, my stepmother died of cancer, and it was a home death, and it was my father, me, and my younger brother who were doing the primary care. And I think right after that, I made some decisions in my life to recommit myself even more fully to my art in the way that I think only big momentous life changes can thrust you into something new. And this is a poem about that time. What remains grows ravenous. I'm afraid that I won't do the right thing in the face of disaster. Or I'm afraid I will be stupidly brave. I'll pull the helmet off the fallen when you're supposed to leave it on, in case it's holding things together. Also, I like to discuss my feelings too much. The only thing I learned about a home death is that it requires a lot of washcloths. When we started to make a home together, he liked a lot of washcloths, the small, cheap kind, for every day you're alive. Sometimes I would have dreams that she was still alive, and I couldn't find enough washcloths to help her, to clean her face, the tumor's foul, black spit up. I'd wake and fold all our new towels as neatly as I could and pile them in high piles so you could see them in case there was an emergency. What I didn't like was how people talked to me now that I was no longer single. They were nicer. Men who never looked at me would start up a conversation like I was suddenly some safer form of fire. When my dad became a widower, women brought meals and wine and pies. The word widower looks like window, something you can see yourself in the dark. We fell in love around the same time, which seemed right and also wrong. Look at us living. They met at the same time, his love and mine. I didn't realize it, but I was wearing my dead stepmom's sunglasses. His new love was stunning and kind, and I tried to imagine I was seeing her through her eyes, like looking up from the bottom of a pool. No one wants to be remembered for their death, or rather, I don't. So why do I remember hers and remember hers? I think I did everything right. Someone told me that I should have told her all the things she had done to hurt me before she died. But I didn't. Still, I lost her face. Months later, when we were on our first date, I tried to seem put together. I wore a shawl she had given me and her ring. I thought everything was behind me, death and dying and sickness. I didn't know I was changing my life, that I would have done anything, that what was left of me would become so ruthless to survive. Thank you. I'll read another poem about that time period. Those of you who've dealt with a home death will probably recognize about this. The Riveter. What I didn't say when she asked me why I knew so much about dying was that for me, it was work. When Dad called to say we had a month, I made a list. I called in my team to my office in a high-rise, those Rosies of know-how, those that had lost someone loved, those that had done the assembly line of a home death, and said, "What's this about not keeping her on TPN?" One woman, who was still soft with sadness, said, "It depends on whether she wants to die of heart failure or to drown in her own fluids." I nodded and wrote that down, like this was a meeting about a client who wasn't happy. "What about hospice?" I asked. They said, "They'll help, but your dad and you guys will do most of it." I put a star by that. We had a plan of action. When this happens, we do this. When that happens, we do that. But what I forgot was that it was our plan, not hers, not the one doing the dying. This was a plan for those that still had a next. See, our job was simple, keep on living. Her job was harder, the hardest. Her job, her work, was to let the machine of survival break down, make the factory fail, to know this war was winless, to know that she would single-handedly destroy us all. poems, and I'll say, because I have to recover.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm going to recover. This poem is about life. Well, you know, I'm from the West Coast, so we didn't have fireflies. So when I came to the South, I thought, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. What are these things? They're just magical beyond belief. So I called them field bling. You know, California girl has to. Field bling. Nights when it's warm and no one is watching, I walk to the edge of the road and stare at all the fireflies. I squint and pretend they're hallucinations, bright made-up waves of the brain. I call them field bling. I call them fancy creepies. It's been a long time since I've wanted to die. It makes me feel like taking off my skin suit and seeing how my light flies all on its own, neon and bouncy like a wannabe star. There were so many love poems in the book. I wanted to write a poem that was a love poem to my single self. And I realized I had already written it, so it's an older poem that I sort of brought into the book, and I'm glad. Glow. In the black, illegible moment of foolish want, there is also a neon sign flashing. The sign above the strip joint where my second big love worked as a bouncer and saved the girls from unwanted hands, unpaid for hands. Thin-lipped ladies with a lot on their minds and more on their backs, loaded for bear and for the long winter's rain, loaded for real, and I've always been a jealous girl. But when he'd come home with a 4 a.m. stomp in his boots and undressed to bed, he was fully there, fully in the room. My sleeping body made awake, and there was a gentleness to this, a long opening that seemed to join us in the saddest hour. Before now, I don't know if I have ever loved anyone, or if I have ever been loved, but men have been very good to me, have seen my absurd out-of-placeness, my bent grin, an uncalled for loud laugh, and wanted to love me for it. That have been warm in their wanting, that sometimes I wanted to love them too. And I think that must be worth something, that should be a celebrated thing, that though I have not stood on a mountain under the usual false archway of tradition and chosen one person forever, what I have done is risked everything for that hour in the black night, where one flashing light looks like love. I have pulled over the body's car and let myself believe that the dance was only for me, that this gift of a breathing one who once was always a gift, was the only sign worth stopping for, that the neon glow was a real star, gleaming in its dying, like us all, like us all. I visited a college in Texas, and no, it was a high school, and there were high school students that were having a day of silence for to honor all of the LGBT students who had been victims of bullying. And it was really this beautiful moment. So this poem is sort of sparked by that experience. Day of song, day of silence. The strange crying sounds of the peacocks on the private school grounds echo in perfect lawns, and I remember the unruly feathered fowl of my earlier years that draped the flim-flam landscape of the home of the first girl I ever kissed. The students today make a vow of silence to honor gay and lesbian kids who've been bullied, so that we can visit and read poems they can't speak. They are silent for those that are silenced. And I'm thinking now of making out with Sarah and how later we made pickle and mayonnaise sandwiches and sat by the edge of her empty pool, our legs swinging into nothingness, the sun's heat at our backs, the sound of peacocks screaming, at first harmless, then like some far-off siren. This poem, some of you heard last night. When I was first starting out to be a poet, I fell in love with an older poet, and this is sort of the poem about when I realized that might have been a mistake. It's a true story. Service. Somewhere outside of Albuquerque, I was all fed up with the stories about your ex-girlfriend's guest billboard in New York City. And to make matters worse, I had to pee like a racehorse, or like a girl who'd way too much to drink way too far from home. You stopped at a friend's body shop to talk about a buddy who was stuck someplace in Mexico. You were talking pulling strings and taking pulls off a brown bottle, and no one told me where the restroom was. So I walked back to where the hot rods were displayed like dogs ready for a fight, baring their grills like teeth. I was hungry. The air smelled like hot gasoline and that sweet carnation smell of oil and coolant. A girl pitbull came and circled me as I circled the cars. She sniffed my ankles like I was her kin or on some kind of rescue mission. You were still talking, not a glance in the direction of me and the bitch working our ways around the souped-up Corvettes and the power tools. The pit was glossy, well cared for, a queen of the car shop. And when she widened her hind legs and squatted to pee all over one of the car's dropped canvases, I took it as a challenge. That strong yellow stream seemed to be saying, "Girl, no one's gonna tell me when to take a leak, when to bow down, when not to bite." So right then, in the dim lights of that strange garage, I lifted my skirt and pissed like the hard bitch I was. Thank you. This is a poem for my brother, and in the last section of the book, it deals a little bit more with identity, and this poem is about that. Prickly pear and fisticuffs. My older brother says he doesn't consider himself Latino anymore, and I understand what he means, but I stare at the weird fruit in my hand and wonder, what is it to lose a spiny layer? He's explaining how white and lower middle class we grew up and how we didn't know anything about culture except maybe Northern California culture, which means we just get stoned more often and frown on superstores. I want to do whatever he says. I want to be something entirely without words. I want to be without tongue or temper. 2 days ago in Tennessee, someone said, "Stop it, Ada's Mexican." And I didn't know what they were talking about until one of them said, "At least I didn't say wetback." And everyone laughed. Honestly, another drink and I could have hit someone. Started the night's final fight. And I don't care what he says. My brother would have gone down swinging and fought off every redneck whitey in the room. This is a poem for my grandfather who crossed the border in 1928. It's also after the artist Jose Davila, who does cutouts, so there'll be a cityscape and then buildings will be gone, or he'll do sort of images of people, but the actual images of the people are gone, so they're just the shadows. A trick of the light. Where do you keep your sharp tools of history? Shattered black spikes wedged in the rigid spine. What did the spikes hold you up? Whose puny flag? When was the border just a line in the dirt? Whose dirt? Whose line? Where did the ghosts go when we refused to spit out their clouds? It's true, he smudged oranges in Canoga Park and lived in a chicken coop. Yes, oranges. Now there are no oranges in all of the San Fernando Valley. No oranges, just names. Oranges, Orange Boulevard, Orange County, the way we do naming what's no longer there. Here was an orange grove. Here was a brown boy. I bowed down in my suit of hand-me-down spikes into the coop where the warm fowl slept against him. The hens do not love him, neither do the oranges, but they survive together. Fuel for the future. A picture of a feather without the bird. A picture of an orange without the tree. A picture of a shadow without a boy. I'm just going to read one more. And then we can have some questions and answers. I'm going to read, I'm going to end with a love poem. I wrote this poem after my partner's mother said that his great-grandmother had either died in childbirth or was struck by lightning. And I thought that was a pretty big difference. So his poem is called, "Oh Please, Let It Be Lightning." We were crossing the headwaters of the Susquehanna River in our new car we didn't quite have the money for, but it was slick and silver, and we named it after the local strip club next to the car wash, the Spearmint Rhino. And this wasn't long after your mother said she wasn't sure if one of your ancestors died in childbirth or was struck by lightning. There just wasn't anyone left to set the story straight, and we started to feel old, and it snowed. The ice and salt and mud on the car made it look like how we felt on the inside. The dog was asleep on my lap. We had 7 more hours before our bed in the bluegrass would greet us like some southern cousin we forgot we had. Sometimes you have to look around at the life you've made and sort of nod at it, like someone moving their head up and down to a tune they like. New York City seemed years away, and all the radio stations had unfamiliar call letters and talked about God, the one that starts his name with a capital and wants you not to get so naked all the time. Sometimes there seems to be a halfway point between where you've been and everywhere else, and we were there. All the trees were dead, and the hills looked flat in real bad landscape paintings in some nowhere gallery off an interstate, but still, it was kind of pretty. Not because of the snow, but because you somehow found a decent song on the dial. And there you were, with your marvelous mouth, singing full-lunged, driving full speed into the gloomy thunderhead, glittery and blazing and alive, and it didn't matter what was beyond us, or what came before us, or what town we lived in, or where the money came from, or what new night might leave us hungry and reeling. We were simply going forward, riotous and windswept, and all too willing to be struck by something shining and mad and so furiously hot it could kill us. So if you have any questions, stunned silence. You're like, why are you so crazy? Yeah.
Roughly how long would it take you to write just a single poem, and how long did it take you to write a whole book?
A single poem, I can write a draft of a poem in about an hour. But it's probably not finished for months after that, but a draft, and then I tinker and tinker and tinker. But this book took 5 years to write. Yeah, it's a collection of, I was working on a novel, and this was sort of what I was doing in the meantime. So, yeah.
Thank you.
But I mean, after all, the book, the poetry book, actually is, came out before the novel, so the novel's still in the box. Yeah.
What got you to become a poet?
Oh, I always really loved words, and I loved songs a great deal. And I took my first and second poetry workshop in my second year of undergraduate, and that was really that sort of moment when things opened for me. I was a theater major, and I said this to a few in the classes earlier, was that I thought that was sort of what I wanted to do, and I really loved theater, and I loved the world of it and creating this magical place, and but I didn't like the fact that you had to do it with other people, and I didn't like the fact that you had to audition for it, so that someone could basically tell you when you got to be creative. And I thought, what if your art had those kind of restrictions? And I just couldn't do it. So for me, I found that poetry class, and I thought, oh wow, I don't need anybody. I just need my pen and my pencil and just alone time and, the occasional quesadilla, and I'll be okay. so yeah, it was my, I guess I was probably 19 or 20. Yeah.
Have you always wanted to do books in addition to poetry, or when did that
You mean
come?
novels or?
No,
Yeah.
whatever it is you're writing.
Yeah, I feel like I always wanted to write novels as well, but I never really knew if I could. And so in 2010, I sort of started the adventure of figuring out if I could or not. I'm still figuring that out. I know that I enjoy it, and I'm learning a lot. I'm on my second, so we'll see. Yeah. The jury's still out.
What's it going to be about?
The first novel is about a woman whose marriage dissolves and she has to move back in with her parents in Sonoma. And it actually is not me. I'm and then there's also sort of a murder that happens, and it's intriguing. I don't know. And that's called People from Here. It's about sort of the locals of the Sonoma Valley. And then the second is a young adult novel, and it's called The Woods, tentatively, and it is, I joke there's a cross between Alice in Wonderland and Flatliners. So it's got a lot of darkness, but the woods behind her house are magical, and she finds that out on the day that her mother dies. So for me, it's just a real joy to write. We'll see what happens. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned auditioning in theater.
Mhm.
I was wondering about your relationship. Do you have an editor, and how is it kind of the same relationship?
It isn't, for me it isn't, because I can still produce something. With theater, you can't really act alone in a room without the audience. You have to sort of put something together. I can still sit alone and create something, and even if it's not read by anyone, I can create it. So I think that level is really important to me. I do have, there is of course the people who are publishing the poems and whether or not they're going to make fixes, and then there are the people who are deciding on whether or not it will be a fit for their magazine or journal. And that's always tough too. You still deal with that, but it's not, I don't think it's on that level of just, no matter what, I still can create my art, which was important to me. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about writing plays?
It's funny because I think about my theater background, and it seems like the natural fit. I've never done it. I think I did one in 4th grade, which is pretty darn good. But I would like to try it. But my best friend is a playwright, and so I think that's the other part of it, is that I feel like she does it so well. Yeah, that I'm like, okay, we met in theater school, so it's kind of, I feel like she got that, and I kind of went my own way. But maybe someday, maybe she'll allow me to collaborate. Yeah.
Where do you find your most inspiration from?
It comes in different forms and in different days. Sometimes it comes from, the real darkness of an event, and sometimes it comes from pure joy of something. Mostly, I have to sit and be quiet for a while to figure out what's happening. I get a lot of inspiration from nature. I think just being alone with my thoughts in the natural world is really important. But I have books. The first 3 books are all written in New York City, so I feel like there's that tension there. But yeah, it comes in all sorts. Sometimes someone will just say something, and I'll think, oh, what a wonderful phrase, or I'll read something in a newspaper, and there will be some sort of a twist. We were talking about this today, and or even in with Jose Davila's work. Like, I saw his work, and I immediately started thinking about my grandfather, and that was where that poem came from. But I think if I were to choose one, it would definitely be the natural world.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
What are the names of some of the poets that you really love that excite you?
I really love Larry Levis is someone that I always read. I love Natalie Diaz. Her work right now is just fantastic. She has a book called When My Brother Was an Aztec. It's about life on the reservation. It's phenomenal. Eduardo Secretal's book, Slow Lightning, is great. Rigoberto Gonzalez, Unpeopled Eden, is phenomenal. Ross Gay has a new book called A Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. And it's just, it's one of those, he and I talk a lot about how difficult it is to find a language for joy. I think that sort of with poetry, we naturally gravitate towards the hard things and the sad things and the things that are disturbing, and how hard it is to sing a song of praise when life is really hard and lots of bad things are happening on a constant level. And so he and I relate to each other a lot in what we're trying to do in our work, and so that book is just brilliant. It's definitely suggested.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
How do you fit so many different emotions in your book without making them all choppy? Because from what I experienced, they glide very easily.
Thank you. I'm very interested in mapping how the mind works. I don't necessarily need to make sense of it always, but I like to sort of try to pin the dragon to the page, if you will. And so I think that I'm interested in how the thoughts just go. So instead of editing and stopping myself and saying, oh, this couldn't go here because this poem is about that, or whatever, I let the natural thought process take over. And so I think that hopefully allows that sort of seamless interaction between those emotions, so that you can have joy and sadness and frustration and, all at once, because that's kind of the human mess we live in, right? That all those things are happening all at once. So, yeah. So I think I try not to stop myself and say, oh no, this poem's going to be about this, so it can't go here. But to just let the mind actually, and then try to record what it's actually doing. Yeah.
What's a day in the life like? Do you have a schedule that you keep to? Do you go for long periods without writing, or do you write every day?
That's a good question. It changes a lot for me. When I'm home, I write every day. And I actually still probably write every day something, some little note. I usually take notes on my phone. So if you think I'm texting, sometimes I'm actually just writing a poem. So when I'm home and things are calm, I'll probably even produce a poem every day, the draft of the poem. But then when I'm on the road, it gets a little difficult, because I need to be alone to write. It's hard, really hard. Like, everyone's always like, oh, let's go to a coffee shop, we'll work together. And oh, I can't do that. I also compose out loud. So I'll start the poem, How to Triumph Like a Girl. I like the lady horses best, how they make it all look easy. Like, I actually will start to write the poem like that, so I would look like the crazy person in a cafe. I'd get kicked out pretty fast, I think. So I do have to be alone to write, and I have to have some some space to really feel like there's a place for the poem to come in. But I do try to keep it constant. But that said, sometimes I'm just taking notes, and sometimes, I do go stretches. To be honest, with Bright Dead Things, since it's sort of birthed into the world, I've been putting a lot of my energy to getting it out there and giving it the love it deserves. Because I kind of feel like we owe that to our books. Like, we spent all this time alone creating it. I can't just walk away. I have to be like, okay, now I should share it, So that's sort of what, and that's not always the same space that the creative Ada lives in. Creative Ada is quiet, alone, by herself. So learning how to do that on the road is a little bit difficult for me, but it's still there. Still there. Yeah.
What's your favorite poem that you've written?
What was it?
What's your favorite poem? Do you have one that you've written that you just...
Oh, favorite poem that
really
I've
like?
written. Oh, that's interesting. That's hard. I feel like there's a few that were that's changed things for me, that opened new doors. So those are always like, they're sort of linchpin poems, or like paradigm shift poems, where everything went, oh, I could do that. I wrote a poem in graduate school called Centerfold, and it was about that moment I'm sure many of us have had, about sort of discovering Playboy magazine as a child and as an 8-year-old, and being like, what is this? And instead of making a judgment on it as the adult self might do, I allowed myself to stay in that moment of what the child self thought. And that was new for me, because I think at the time I was always trying to sort of make like, oh, this, I must have thought this or whatever. Instead, I just tried to keep, and the poem ends, I thought, she must be famous. I thought how lovely it would be to be her, to be naked all the time and dancing. Because that was really what I imagined. So I let myself stay there. So that poem called Centerfold, I think, it's maybe perhaps not my favorite poem, but one of those that sort of shifted for me in graduate school. And then I think one of my current favorites, I have a lot of current favorites in this book. It seems strange to say, but I think also because it took me 5 years, and to see them all together, I'm like, oh, right. They weren't written, these were all individual poems before they became this book. So seeing them all together is reminding me, and it's kind of like taking all the objects you love and shining them up and seeing them again. So I know, is that weird to say you love the new book? I love it. But yeah, How to Triumph Like a Girl is probably one of my new favorites. Too. Yeah.
I know sometimes a phrase can take you in a lot of different directions,
Yeah.
those words, and your poetry seems so clean to me, and the way you transition and you stay with a particular line of thought. Those things that you may have paired out in the process, do you ever revisit those and have another poem that you follow that direction with?
Yeah, I have like a dump folder. I basically, because I think that it's hard because like when we used to compose all the time by hand, we never really lost anything. Like you could keep those journals. But it's really scary now, because if you're working on a computer, you cut whole sections of poems and they're gone. Right? So I can't do that. So I usually have a Word file open while I'm composing, and I dump things that I know I like but just aren't working in the poem, and those go into a file. So I do revisit them. And sometimes I'm like, what is this? Well, this is really cool, and then I can build around it. But yeah, I don't like that fact that you could just lose something now. It just seems like so scary, right? It used to be like, we could go back to the journal and say, like, yeah, I would cut that out. Oh, that was the right ending. Whoops. Yeah, so I always do that. I used to do it actually in graduate school. I used to cut them actually out, and I had a fishbowl, and I would put lines in the fishbowl and so kind of collect them. Yeah.
When you write, does everything you write you hope to be published, or do you have things that are too personal for public?
That's a great question. I was gonna say, there's probably a few of this book that shouldn't have been published. Well, it's funny because that poem "Service" that I read about the person peeing, that might have been me. That I never sent that out. So it's kind of interesting. Like I never sent it out to be published, and yet it sort of became a sort of key. And it's pretty funny because people will be like, "This poem, you signed this page," and like I'm like, okay. So so I think that I held back some of those things, and I think there are some poems that are still maybe not that I will write and not share. I think I feel like there's that moment where if you want it out in the world, you also have to be prepared to be accountable for it. I don't really believe in the artist having just to be able to do whatever they want and not suffer the consequences. I think if you're a family member or a loved one or a best friend, you get to talk back. So, unless I want to start that conversation, I'll keep it to myself. But I would still write the poem. It just might go into a drawer. Well, until I'm ready to deal with it. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still using pen and paper.
Good.
And it's really hard for me to type because sometimes I write really big or sometimes. Is it hard for you to switch over from, you said journaling, were you using pen and paper to start and then?
I mean, I kind of do. I've been doing both for so long that I feel okay with it. One thing for me is that, and this probably sounds very silly, but I write copy. So I do a lot of a magazine work. It's how I get by. It's great. I use a different font when I'm writing a poem. So that it doesn't feel like it's just writing anything else. Like it has its special font, and that means we're in a special place. So that's important to me. But I still do a lot of handwriting. But when it comes to that final draft, it's almost always going to be typed out. Yeah. Yeah.
Who were your intended audience when you were writing these poems?
That's a great question. I feel like I have. It sort of has. It's grown, and it's changed because I think with my first book. My intended audience were the few people that were reading my poems, which are my family and my close friends, And now that I've had the 3 books prior to this book, I think that I was trying to reach a larger audience. And so I would say the readers that I know that come up to me and have already read my books and are connecting to the work already. So that's kind of important. But I also feel like I'm still writing for regular people. I didn't write this book for poets. Not to say I don't want poets to love it. I hope they do. But it's not a poetry book for poets. It's a poetry book for people. That's what I wanted, Yeah.
You said.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Whoever.
Thank you. You just stated that you felt that a lot of your favorite poems were in your most recent work. And do you feel as a writer that you hit kind of your full stride, you're really comfortable with how you're doing things, or are you always looking for challenges or new ways to grow your process?
Yeah, I feel like I think most writers, or maybe most artists, I don't know, my mom's here, she's an artist, she did all the covers of my books. I feel like we often like our most recent work. So if you ask, what do you love that you're working on? It's like, well, what I'm working on right now. That always feels like the most alive and the most sort of active and real. But I am always trying to push myself. And I think that's why I haven't necessarily been writing a ton since this book came out, because I feel like I really pushed myself. So there's this part of me that just kind of wants to be like, I'm going to work on the YA novel and take a breather. Because with this book, I was walking, my prompt kept being, what are you afraid of? Or what do you think is not a poem? Which is sort of how Service came about. What do you think you can't say in a poem? Or what? So I kept asking myself these questions, and then I would go back and write a poem. So whatever, and I do have sort of a next project in mind, although it's way too early to talk about. But yeah, I'm always trying to push myself deeper, and also to push myself into a place that I really enjoy. I'm not someone who believes art is suffering. Life is suffering. Art should be a gift. Yeah.
Do you ever fear that you're gonna come into like a dead end with your writing one year?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, all the time. Absolutely. I have a friend, Joe Knox, and we always say that if we feel like we've written a good poem, like a good solid poem, those of you who know that feeling where you're like, yeah, like I did something. And then you have that really beautiful feeling of elation, and it's followed right afterwards by that feeling like you'll never write anything again. Ever. So yeah, I have it all the time. Like I'm like, well, this is obviously my last book. So yes. Yeah.
A theme in several of your poems seem to be living in the here and now and really enjoying the moment, without so much respect to the past, the present, that defines us. And you explain that maybe the home death situation helped clarify that for you and the importance of doing that. Was that a theme of yours before you experienced that home death? Or do you feel like that was part of you grew up with that sort of attitude, or were there other?
I definitely think that I did have my own sense of mortality. I think I was very aware of that, but I should say I do think my stepmother was sick for 6 years. She was given 6 months and then lived for 6 years, colon cancer. So she was in the late stages that entire time. So we were dealing with this. So it wasn't just the home death, but that entire 6 years, right? So that I think was very significant in that idea of living in the here and now and being present and realizing, she was also very young. She died, she was 52. So I think that all of that, was sort of, it solidified that. I don't feel like I was really working towards living in the here and now and being as present as I hope I am now, or trying to still work on, until around 2008, 2009. And that was sort of maybe at the end of her life, but also in a moment where I felt like all I was doing was living in what's next or what has come before. I mean, I was not living here at all. And I just didn't want to be that person. I still don't want to be that person, but it's hard not to. Our culture sort of cultivates that, right? What's next, what's next, what's next, and who did you used to be, and what happened to you in the past, instead of just being right here in the present. So, yeah, it's still something I work on. Yeah. Constantly. Yeah.
I was wondering, particularly because of that, I think it's Riveter and mowing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it just seems to flow quite effortlessly, almost like the kind of experience you have sometimes when you're inspired and the verse pours out of you.
Mm-hmm.
But you obviously craft it, right? Because you never said it just happened. It's always a draft, and then you refine it. Are there times when you don't want to mess with it, but you know you have to?
If I don't want to mess with it, I often don't. Like when I say it's a draft, sometimes when I say it sits around for a month and I tinker, sometimes I tinker and I change the title or I do something, but that's it. Like oftentimes, not oftentimes, I would say, like mowing, I think mowing actually did come out in one complete. I think Riveter, the ending was complete. The beginning needed a little more work and tightening, because it took me a while to figure out what that poem was about. I didn't know that poem was going to end there, that the work was going to be about her work. I didn't know that. So that was important. And so once I finished and got to that ending, I was able to go back and revise the beginning. But yeah, if I feel like something's complete, or if I just kind of walk away, like, balancing an egg on its end, and you're just like, nobody move. I think I just finished something. Yeah, so I don't think, I do think you can revise to a fault, so I try not to do that. So, and to try to keep the freshness of it. Well, thank you guys.